more fun orchid facts while we sketch this little flower. So let's just turn the page and get started. Good morning, good morning, good morning. It is 5:30 in the morning on a Thursday morning. Oh my goodness, it's already Thursday morning. Good morning, Claudia. Claudia's in the chat this morning. My mom and dad are in the chat this morning. Got my mom on the phone so she can tell me if anything exciting happens in the chat because I'm not skilled enough to draw and talk and read the chat at the same time. So my mother helps me out with that, and I appreciate it. But on Thursday mornings at 5:30 in the morning, I like to do a little thing where I pull a toy out of the toy box, a random object of the Random Object Randomogrifier, if you will, and I like to draw it and I like to talk about it. And today's random object is an orchid. Orchidea. Orchidea. Today's random object is an orchid. What?
Good morning, Rick. Good morning.
Oh yeah, good morning, Rick. Orchids are 10% of the global flowering population, with some 28,000 known species and several thousand unknown species. They have evolved a mechanism to trick insects into thinking that they are female insects for mating, and they trick the males into showing up and mating with them, attempting to mate with them, I should say, because it can't be successful. They tend to get the males to attempt to mate with them, and in doing so cover themselves with pollen, and then they jump from flower to flower and they spread the pollen from flower to flower. The thing about that this is one of those flowers that has been around long enough. It's been around for about 70 million years, and the insect, one of the insects, like the bee orchid, one of the insects that it actually evolved to do that with is extinct, because male bees don't go gathering pollen. But the bee orchid and the fly orchid both produce female hormones, mimic the female hormones, pheromones, to excite an insect. And the bee orchid, the bee that the bee orchid evolved for is extinct.
Connie said she emailed a picture for Pamela and let her what's on your easel.
Sweet. I need this to tip this way. Somehow that got bumped. Don't get seasick with the camera moving around. That's not the only plant that's done that. Magnolias have done that too. There was a beetle that magnolias are suspected to be pollinated by, and that beetle has been extinct for millions of years. So it's not the only time it's happened. Lots and lots and lots of the old angiosperms developed for bugs that are no longer there. That's enough pencil. I find that if I put too much pencil down, I get confused. 70% An estimated 70% of orchids are epiphytes, which means that they grow in the canopy with their roots exposed, and they are adept at gathering moisture out of the mist in the air instead of drawing water up and nutrients up out of the soil. The roots are.
Why you don't have to water them very often?
That is why you don't have to water them very often. They are adapted to. They are adapted to pulling moisture out of the atmosphere. They grow in the canopies of the rainforests in the tropics. They grow in the canopies, and they never touch the ground when they're alive. Now, of course, they die and they fall out of the tree, but a healthy live plant never touches the ground.
Good morning, Adele.
Good morning, Adele. We may get essence of flower today.
There's Miss Ivy.
Ivy? Ivy, did you find your kittens? Have they come out to play yet? It's been a week. It's been 2 weeks. Their eyes should be starting to open. They should start to be moving around. Their seeds, their pollen, and even their seeds are just the size of dust. And the nectar tube that the one in particular had was long and thin, and Darwin, when looking at it 40 years before the discovery, there's a moth that pollinates that flower, and 40 years before they discovered that moth, Darwin described it, saying it must look like this because this is how it has to reach the inside of this nectar tube. And sure enough, 20 years later, Darwin dies, and 20 years after Darwin's death, they find the moth that he described, and it was almost exactly as he described it, because the nectar tube was long and the nectar was down at the very tip of it. Darwin knew that it had to have a very long proboscis, and described everything except its color, based on the shape of the moth, or based on the shape of the flower.
Claudia says, what a great man.
Which man?
I guess Darwin.
What did Dell say?
What?
What?
It's Claudia.
Claudia says, she sent a picture to Pamela. The suspense, what you do with the color or color, don't know what's right. Adele said hello. Claudia says hi. Yes, Darwin. I'm just reading back through the chat while I'm running the eraser here. I know that's exciting for y'all.
Is this toy color accurate?
There are 28,000 known species of orchids, and they come in all different colors. So it is accurate to one of them. Is it accurate? Is there one exactly colored like this? Probably. 28,000 species. There's probably one like that, and that's 28,000 known species. And of the 28,000 known species, only about 1,000 of them have been assessed as to their numbers, their range, their successfulness. Only about 1,000 of them have actually been assessed, and they're still learning a lot about the other known species of orchids, but they're still discovering new species of orchids. In the mid 90s, they discovered a very rare type of orchid in Vietnam, and almost immediately plucked it to near extinction. The problem is that they can't. The floral industry is highly competitive, and they can't grow enough in volume fast enough to keep up with the market. And so they still have people that go out into the wilderness and cut orchids out of the trees for sale. Sometimes they take the whole plant. Sometimes they just gather all the flowers. If they're close enough to civilization, they just gather all the flowers so they can sell them in a local market.
Micah's on vertical.
Good morning, Micah. But
yes.
Yeah, Micah, my dad is George, and my mom is passed me not. So they're already in the chat. So yeah, I said good morning, Dad and Mom. But it causes problems for the plants because the plants can't reproduce in the wild fast enough to keep up with the poachers. And so the poachers the brand newly discovered species in Vietnam almost went extinct right after they found it because of poachers. This is my favorite part of the process. This is the part that gives the whole thing shape and turns it from a line drawing into a dimensional drawing. Australia, and you're typing right side up. Good job. Is it Micah or Mika? What you said, Mom?
I said Adele said so. It's not a specific type of orchid, just an orchid. And then that they're discovering and making new ones. And Heidi says, and I thought over 2,000 varieties of sunflowers was a lot.
Yeah, they are still breeding new orchids and still finding new orchids. Yes, that's accurate. And 2,000 sunflowers is a lot. This is one of the oldest known flowering plants to have consecutively grow. There are older flowering plants that are dead, that are extinct, but this is one of the oldest families that have been consistently alive.
Oh, so it's after he's in Austria, not Australia.
Austria, not Australia.
It's 12:45 there. Okay, got it.
So you're next door to Claudia then. You're like an inch and a half away from Claudia on the map. Claudia's in the Netherlands. You're like an inch away. It's lunchtime for her too. You're like an inch and a half away from her on the map. But that explains why you're not typing upside down. The people in Australia, sometimes we have to invert them.
What's happening, Mr. Fox?
It's school year.
Yeah, that's true.
Winter's picking up there.
Ivy says she's on horizontal on her phone and vertical on her TV, and that's backwards. That's what it's going to be, Ivy, backwards. Claudia says yes, Austria. I've been there a lot.
See? Right next door to each other. 5 minutes away. Inch and a half on the map.
The artistic biker is riding through the Netherlands and Austria.
That's awesome. And Australia. And Canada. And Canada.
Long trip today. Canada and Indiana.
And believe it or not, we have viewers in like Brazil.
Lithuania.
And Lithuania. The ones in Brazil don't talk because we don't do the show in Portuguese. But I have evidence that we have sometimes up to 20 viewers from South America, from Brazil. Let me dry this real quick. Claudia said her favorite part was the dancing, and she said it just in time for me to dance. Is Pamela here? Did Pamela did come in, didn't she? Because it's time for the vermilion.
Claudia says most Brazilians understand Spanish.
That's true, but we don't do the show in Spanish either. I tell you, it's funny. When I was in college delivering pizzas, the migrant workers would come through for the wheat harvest and occupy a lot of the hotels and rent houses temporarily, and I would get a chance to visit with them. And they would watch the telenovelas from Brazil. They would watch the Brazilian telenovelas because they were more those soap operas. That's a telenovela, is a soap opera. Those soap operas were always more passionate, if you will. And here's these big burly guys that have been working all day long in the fields, and they come back to their apartment, and these guys in particular, that are the ones that I'm talking about, these guys in particular were not they were not watching the telenovela because their wives made them watch it. They were watching the telenovelas because they were intrigued by the story, and they couldn't wait to find out what happened next. But the story, because it's out of Brazil, was in Portuguese, and they understand Portuguese without learning Portuguese. That's different. It's a different language for them, and without actually learning Portuguese, they understand Portuguese as well as I would understand German, because German and English are very close. And once you catch on to the proximities of German and English, you can kind of understand, and the more you listen to it, the easier it is. But they're not the same language, obviously. But I always thought it was interesting that they would watch they wouldn't watch the Mexican telenovelas, because they said they weren't as passionate, they weren't as interesting. So my first coat was vermilion to really warm it up, because my scarlet's kind of blue. So my first coat was vermilion to really warm it up, and now I'm going over it with some scarlet. To give it that pinkish hue. Their mechanism for seed dispersal, having the insects come along and be attracted to their pheromones, actually evolved several times in several different species of orchid over the thousands and millions of years that orchids have been in existence. Their seeds are in clusters. Their seeds are dust size, and they're in clusters, and they need to be attached to something to be carried over. The clusters are too sticky and too small for the wind to pick them up, and so they attach to insects, and the different orchids attached in different ways. And throughout history, they've managed to co-evolve the same through convergent evolution. Now, what that means to me is that there's a common ancestor that had a very similar trait, and several different species of orchid were able to capitalize on that trait. It's not.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Did you watch Jane the Virgin here? That was her first telenovela. And then Ivy wants to know what tonight's subject is.
Oh, okay. So on Thursday nights, we gather and we just art together as besties. There's no discussion like this where I try to talk about the organism's life cycle and history and preservation and conservation status. We just pick a subject and we paint it. And I thought tonight we'd do some giant isopods, some roly polies.
Oh yay! I like roly polies.
I do too. When I was looking at the snail pictures, when we did the snail, was it yesterday or the day before? Yeah, it was yesterday we did the snail. When I was looking at the snail pictures for references, I saw some roly polies, and I was really, I just think they're interesting. I found it. Well, I tell you what. Let me dry this real quick. We'll talk more on the other side. Claudia, roly-poly is a colloquialism. They're isopods, and they're commonly known as pill bugs. They're the bugs with the divided exoskeleton that can roll up into a ball. They're commonly called pill bugs in a lot of the world. But I grew up in the sticks where we just called them roly-polies.
Back up there a ways.
What?
Rick, let me get to it. Cat's quite very quickly. Rick says, just so you know, I almost forgot to get up for the show this morning. Looks like it's running in the family this week.
Happened to me once. It happened to me once, Rick. And it's my show. So yeah, out of the 28,000 species, they make up about 10% of all the flowering plants in the world. Orchids do. And of the illegal plant trade, they are easily 70% of all of the illegal plant trade. Throughout the world. And while they can make laws that says you're not allowed to buy or sell them, you're not allowed to poach wild ones and sell them. They can make those laws all they want to. How do they enforce them? Because once you get them, how do you know? I need a blot paper. How do you know when somebody shows up with a plant? Now, that's why it's not writing, it's empty. When somebody shows up with a plant, how do you know offhand that they didn't buy that plant legit? You can't, all they have is a plant and they say, yeah, I bought it at that market. So you don't know, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, maybe they poached it. You don't, it's hard to enforce that. So the illegal plant trade is one of those things that it's very hard to police. You know, they're talking about the roly-polies, and they're talking about them being tiny.
When someone receives an orchid, it's a compliment to them.
I don't. When somebody does what?
When someone receives an orchid, it's considered a compliment. It means beauty and strength and luxury.
I just like getting flowers.
Yeah.
They're,
used to, it's good for those things.
Claudia's in the chat talking about roly-polies being tiny. Look up deep sea isopods, and you'll see what I was looking at when I decided to do a roly-poly. They're not tiny. They're about twice the size of a ferret. So they use these things to make a type of flour that's used in breads and ice cream and traditional medicine. They've been harvesting orchids for thousands of years. What is today? Today's the 30th. We wrapped this up just in time. Almost didn't make it. Today's the last day of April. Can you believe that? But nearly 800 of the species are on the verge of extinction.
Rick says fire police that know fluently 25,000 different kinds of orchids. It's that simple.
Yeah. I doubt they know 10 different types of orchids. So, evolution.
You don't think the flower's going
extinct?
Yes, I couldn't think the word.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Lots of plants have gone extinct. They allude to that in Jurassic Park when she says this plant shouldn't be here. It's been extinct for millions of years. Yeah. Anyway, here is my version of it. Oh my goodness gracious. Compared to the photograph. Let's see it from my perspective. Evolutionary ghost is the term for when two different species are dependent upon each other, and one of the species goes extinct. The other species still carries the traits that show that its dependency on the first one. So like when these plants have traits that mimic the bees that are extinct, that's called an evolutionary ghost. So there it is from my perspective. We didn't even touch on George O'Keeffe. Probably should have spent some more time talking about George O'Keeffe. Anyway, that's what I did this morning. Tomorrow, what do we have tomorrow? Oh, the suspense. Oh, okay. Yeah, Claudia, I don't have that particular shade of magenta, so I had to make it with vermilion and scarlet. I took a little artistic license with it. Tomorrow, we have a sequoia. Now, the sequoias, this is the biggest tree on Earth, and it actually needs fire to reproduce. We'll talk more about that tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. Texas time. So you may want to click your notification bell so you don't miss any of that. But yeah, look at the light shining on that thing. Look at the detail. It's the biggest tree on Earth, and it's tiny in my hand. Anyway, we'll talk more about that tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. Texas time. So you may want to set your notification bell so you don't miss any of that. But guys, thank you so much for joining me today. This is my favorite part of the day. Claudia says, it's no problem. I was just noticing the color. Yeah, that's when the color is off, it kind of throws the whole scheme off. But it also changes if I go exactly with that color, it messes up the details on my image. So it's a trade-off, part of being an artist. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. I look forward to it every day. It's my favorite time of the day when I get to art with my besties. I absolutely love visiting with you guys. Rick and Pamela and Ivy and Claudia and Adele, Micah. I absolutely love visiting with you people every morning. It's just the highlight of my day. And when I get to art with my besties, be sure and tune in tonight, 7:00 p.m. Texas time. I have no idea what time that is in your part of the world, except for Ivy and Rick and Pamela for sure. I know what time it is in their world. It's 8:00 for Ivy, and it's 7:00 for Rick and Pamela. That much. See, I got that memorized. But tonight we'll do a roly-poly, and we'll talk about world events, and well, not really world events. We'll just talk about like kids and stuff. But guys, thank you so much for joining me. Be sure and tune in tomorrow, same Artistic Biker time, same Artistic Biker channel. And then we dance till somebody says they see me dancing, because when they see me dancing, that means that the lag has caught up with the stream and I won't get cut off mid-sentence. And it gives you a chance to click the clicky thingies this way if you're on the horizontal and this way if you're on the vertical. It gives everybody a chance to say hello and goodbye. And it gives everybody a chance to ask questions and talk to each other.